Welcome to the Cybersecurity and Cloud Podcast, the podcast where we learn from cybersecurity experts how to stay safe, private, and secure on the cloud and in code. CSCP is hosted by Francesco Cipollone, your cybersecurity friend with a passion for all things cyber and sharing stories of other professionals with you. This episode is brought to you by the generosity of Phoenix Security Limited. Phoenix helps startups and enterprises solve complex software security supply chain visibility by leveraging the power of correlation and contextualization. Discover how Phoenix Security helps CISO and security engineers act fast, prevent burnout, and implement DevSecOps at the speed of cloud. Phoenix Security. Correlate, contextualize, and act on risk with one click. Let's dive in.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Cybersecurity and Cloud Podcast. Today, we have a very special guest that we are, I would say, we're sparring several times on several occasions, and we say, why don't we do a podcast together? Because it was well overdue. So James Berthoty is a good friend and a friend that I disagree sometimes with, but in a good way. But James, thank you for coming on the show. Tell us a little bit more about you for the few folks that haven't heard about you.
Of course. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I appreciate being here. So my background is mostly in smaller companies, and it's from sysadmin into DevOps, into security engineers. So that informs a lot of my perspective, is like very DevOps focused. So even recently, I've been very caught up in the AppSec world, but really, I feel much more comfortable with Kubernetes security, cloud security stuff in general. So that's more of my background, but I've been at a managed detection response provider, and that gave me a lot of insights into how enterprises think of security operations, some of the hands-on challenges that they face. I was on our internal security team building out security for cloud native application they were building. And then I was at a startup called Very Good Security, and I was responsible there for, as part of a very small team, building a SOC 2 automation platform. And there's a reason that you have heard of Vanta and Drata, but not the VGS control platform, because obviously we didn't win. But as part of not winning that, I really enjoyed, that's where I got a love for startups and innovation, where every day we were just fighting to try to innovate and close deals. And that product feedback loop is so tight in smaller organizations. So I do have a love for that. And now I'm at PagerDuty, where we're FedRAMP in process. And so that is part of my vulnerability struggle, is with FedRAMP, there's no, look, I've risk adjusted, or look, I've shown, I'm just going to ignore all these vulnerabilities because they're not in a critical repository. Like, you have to have an explanation for or fix everything. And so that is informing a lot of our decisions and thoughts. And so that's my background. No Microsoft, Amazon, Google type background there. Oh, and now I run Latio Tech as a side project, which is where you can go to get my hot takes on different vendors, as well as just a lot of emerging categories. It's not pay for play. If you look up on Gartner SCA tools, you'll see 5 tools that don't even do SCA, and then you'll see like all of the giant tool providers where it's one thing they do. So Latio is just a little more with it as far as what innovation's happening, what startups exist in the industry, because AppSec is where all of the hot VC money is at the moment.
And you should talk about it more, because I think you're not the only one that has raised this one up, that if you look at specific category aggregator of software solution or security solution, some of the big names are missing for some reason or another. That still puzzles me. But then you also don't look at them for innovation. If you can pay big bucks, then you show up. If you don't pay big bucks, it doesn't mean that you're not innovating. So,
well, it's tough. And to be fair to those guys, like, this space is moving so fast that like SCA scanning, like back when I was using White Source before it was Mend, was like very different, like implementation wise, technology wise. Like, there was no webhook based scanning for Git flows and different Slack bot integration. Like, people, the whole process has changed so radically. But yeah, I think it's just, if you're trying to create giant vetted reports that are paid for tens of thousands of dollars by executive teams and for giant mega corporations, like, you don't have the same freedom I do to just go, oh, that's lame. That's this old vendor's, like, I'm not going to buy it.
So on that subject, What do you think about the AppSec industry was and is? Because I think I agree with you. In the last 10 years has changed. In the last 2 years has done a leap of change. And also would like to have your take on why it's moving so rapidly.
Oh yeah. I think it's people like me. Like I have no software engineering degree. I have no formal development experience. But the cloud, essentially being a data center with an API, has forced people like me to learn coding. And like when you get a CSPM alert, that's something that, as someone with a background in infrastructure, I can address like, oh, this volume is unencrypted. I know what to do with that. But then learning, oh, to fix this, I have to get into the Terraform or I have to get into the Kubernetes deployment. And then from that step, you're one just hair away from, wait, what is this deployment file actually deploying? And then you're in the application code. And so it forces a degree of familiarity that people are going on this journey of, that I see all the time, of Terraform / YAML into Python, into Go or JavaScript. And that is how people are learning code. And so you have that happening alongside just the rapid development of like supply chain risk catching on. And that's where I think SAST is in a weird place right now, because I don't even really know how much to emphasize it or not, because it's so like, doing a SAST evaluation is really pretty radically different than an SCA evaluation. But now a lot of vendors are like shoving them together. And so it's like, how do you weigh one versus the other? And so I think in general, the market is evolving so fast because of people like me. Like more and more security people are getting into application security without really realizing that's what they're doing. And then you also have this rapid market consolidation around, oh, shoot, there's a lot of scanning we can do here. It's not just SaaS. Like we can really break apart and help with all. Like no one needed a Terraform scanner before Terraform was widely adopted, but now it's like a huge market. Yeah,
but it's an attack surface.
Yeah.
Like not just security people have realized that, but also attacker has realized that. And my hot take on that, since we're doing the hot takes here, I had to do it.
Yeah.
The hot take on this is that we might have become fairly decent about implementing firewall enforcing stuff, while we are way behind on software, even CI/CD, losing key here and there. There is so much attack surface that we haven't even thought about it, and somebody has suddenly realized, look, there is a hole there, and there is a hole there, and there are people that are not looking at it. Let's do that.
And then even that you just brought up brings in the struggle with this acronym game that I'm dealing with Alicia all the time. Is, so do you need a CTEM tool to tell you about like your exposure management, or do you need an asset management tool that crosses both cloud and CI/CD assets? There are so many different solutions, because, and this is getting into the WTF's CNAP article of like, those guys, all of those vendors have hooks into every data source imaginable. There's no reason they can't build any of this stuff. And that's true of everyone in this space. If you have a cross-role AWS account with the view-only policy, and you have hooks into a GitHub app authorization, like you can build almost any solution. And so the question just becomes like, how are you going to actually turn that into something that has value, as opposed to just this data dump overload nightmare?
Yeah, and I think I've recently had a couple of hot takes on that. But in the sea of problem, like I think a couple of years ago we had visibility issue. Right now we are suffering from visibility issue, but also from overload of visibility. Like we have more data than we can possibly have, but as well we don't have enough data to actually make sense of it. We have a lot of information, but very few insights. And right now we're suffering from actionability, I think, rather than suffering from knowing the problem. Is what do we do with this information, and even narrowing down to the problem that I need to solve. I think you've done a couple of great videos on reverse engineering, or trying to figure out where is this vulnerability that I really like, because it shows really, yeah, you have this vulnerability, but so what? Where do you go from here to the container? And inside the container, there is the library, but then I can't touch the runtime. I need to touch the image. And then from the image, I actually need to look at the build file. And that's a struggle that a lot of developers, I think, have as security. I'm a developer by trade, so I understand how things are stitched together. But normally, if you roll in from a security perspective, only part of that work, the vulnerability and what it affects, but not how to solve it, because traditionally vulnerability equal patch. And that was the whole vulnerability process. This is not a thing how it is right now. And that's my hot take.
Oh, no, I think there's two different ways to go into diving deep on that. The first is like the way that we think about patch management is so different than like Windows-based infrastructures where it's like, oh, it's patch Tuesday, like I roll to a control group and then the following week I deploy it across the fleet. Like it is like very simple and well-defined, and people still struggled to do it, but at least like it was possible. But now if you're basically running thousands of different flavors of architectures that have to like have some patching cadence. And so trying to figure out the patching is one piece, but then the other piece is the CVE investigation workflow. The CVE system is in such a nightmare. Like I would call it a discipline in crisis, which is to borrow language from what happens in physics and scientific disciplines when there's like conflicting theories of what to do. And then the discipline has to pick a way forward as to what theory to adopt. CVEs to me are in that crisis point because the infrastructure wasn't built. Like to me, CVEs have become if you want to get into development, start contributing to open source is like the career advice. So open source maintainers get these random commits that are like not adding a ton of value, but people are trying to show their contributors. And so it's helpful that more people are getting involved, but it's hard because the infrastructure doesn't exist to handle all of this intake. And CVEs to me are the same way, where it's if I want to make a little buzz for my startup, like maybe we should research and discover a CVE with some open source tool, publish a big article about it, publish how our tool detects it. It turns into there are marketing and employment incentives now to publish CVEs, which is where you get into I've really tried to rack my brain for it. Like I might have one or two examples of CVEs from upstream dependencies that I've actually been vulnerable to, but that's after assessing over the course of my career like thousands of them. And so it's just I'm less at the right now. I don't care about, like, to your point, I just want to see a true positive because I'm so inundated with noise that's all just false positive stuff that it's so hard to get to that. But I do think eventually the market's going to have to swing back because these tools are going to over configure on, we're tuning out all of the noise. There's no false positives, but then someone's going to get breached because like it got called a false positive when it wasn't. And then in the market's going to swing back the other ways to like, oh, we need the really granular detections. We need a lot of noise. So
do you think we're going to go towards the noise reduction? Because a lot of the tool, I don't know, from a ex-CISO perspective, I remember you had a lot of these tools that market themselves. We found 3 more than the other one, and that's how these tools are measured. So their intention is to consistently compete and find more, not find less. The market in itself is not incentivizing precision; it's incentivizing speed and more, I think. And that's what
I think it's starting to swing back on that point. I think more and more people are seeing when I implement during a POC and see a lot of noise, they're finally getting to the point where that's seen as like a bad thing, as opposed to wow, look, this has 20,000 vulnerabilities, but the other one only had 5. So we're getting 20,000 times the amount of value from this other tool. Yeah, the asterisk to that is it gets harder to test that it's actually working, which you need to do during a POC, which is what makes it tough. But and that's why I have stuff like the insecure testing repo, is even so people can test some of this stuff directly, because I've realized how hard it is to try to do that.
Yeah, Phoenix has the insecure repo, but we have a bunch of stuff as well to test because that's what we use internally. OWASP had a really good project. Grant had a really great project to actually benchmark SaaS tool, but then the category became overbloated.
Yeah,
and it became impossible to benchmark it.
That's also, there's a couple issues with that. Is like the one is like Juice Shop is like everyone benchmarks against Juice Shop, and so it's like of course everyone's gonna have, oh, we found everything with you, like yeah, of course you did, like everyone's using it. But then also like it's full of Juice Shop has a lot of in my mind it's more for learning pen testing than it is for learning like exploitation of third-party vulnerabilities or like specific SaaS type issues. Like those are in there for sure. But like most of walking through the exploits are very focused on abusing the logic of the application, which is a separate good thing to test a SaaS scanner against, but it makes it hard to use. I mean, this is why I made my own thing. Because then you also have Kubernetes Goat, which is very similar, but that is very focused on like Kubernetes exploits around the configuration of the cluster. And so I wanted something in between that was like showing more third-party stuff that was like blatantly obvious exploits just to test for like I need this to be so simple. Like that is obviously a SQL injection type of stuff, so people can use it that way.
This episode is brought to you by the generosity of Phoenix Security Limited. Phoenix helps startups and enterprises solve complex software security supply chain visibility by leveraging the power of correlation and contextualization. Phoenix platform connects to your repositories, scanners, and cloud, correlates all the information, and provides you with a prioritized list of vulnerabilities that need to be addressed first. Discover how Phoenix Security helps CISOs and developers remove friction and maximize the use of DevSecOps professionals at phoenix.security. Phoenix Security, correlate, contextualize, and act on risk with one click.
Actually, that brings me a couple of interesting takes of how has AppSec evolved? Like, because we have these two trends of, as you say, people that have stumbled across AppSec because they are shifting right
Yep.
or shifting left, literally shifting left.
Yes.
Or people that have moved top down, like from pen testing, from testing apps and say all of a sudden, oh, I need to fix it and I'm just don't need to find problems. Do you agree or disagree with that view?
Oh yeah, I think AppSec right now has a lot of people that really need to learn from each other. And this is why I appreciated the vibe that Chris had at Threat Modeling Connect. Like that conference was really cool because it brought together people like Adam who have written books on threat modeling to people like me who like, I think formal threat modeling is super lame. And I'm going to like just make the little boxes and show the data flow and be outcome focused. And there are pros and cons to both approaches that we can really learn from by getting together as far as a book length.
Literally, you come after Adam as well. The previous episode was with Adam that we just discussed that.
Yeah, it's because there are at Giant, it's so hard because so much of AppSec, I think really foundationally, AppSec was driven by the mega tech, healthcare, finance companies were the only companies that could afford an AppSec team and had the risk profile that they needed one. Whereas everyone else sort of, it was relegated to whatever. But the mid-market companies had some kind of patch management system in place. And so it makes sense to me that they adopted more of this patching approach, but less of the like things around it. And so I'm sure in my day-to-day, because I don't do like the book-based approach to threat modeling, there's things that I'm missing that are like huge issues. But conversely, if you have to read a book to start threat modeling, like most mid-market security teams are just going to never do it because they're not going to like they have too many other responsibilities where they're going to take a quarter to like really learn threat modeling in depth.
And I think threat modeling is iterative, but we had a problem that is threat modeling from a network perspective, who can attack me, and as you say, the threat modeling from a software perspective, and they are fundamentally linked together, but diametrically separated because AppSec and OPSEC are different and have different mindset and methodology, but they still depend on each other. Apps still run on a box, but the way you think that box, that can be cloud, container, or whatever you want to wrap that box into, or a Rust on Windows that just had a perfect 10.
Yep.
Regardless of what you want to do is you have two mindsets that you have to bring together.
Yeah, that's why I'm really leaning in the product security in terms of everything is defined as code now. And so there's no, and the infrastructure is so closely linked to the application. This is why I even have my hot take that I think container vulnerability scanning will eventually eat SCA scanning as far as
they're very similar.
Right. And the container has the ability to do everything the SCA does. It's just that it's harder to do it that way. And a lot of people haven't built the same like language support that the SCA scanners have. And so it gets to, if you can have all the same findings at the package JSON in the repo, or when it's deployed on the container, like it seems obvious to me that everyone is doing. Normally containers would be given to InfoSec and the code, the package would be given to AppSec, but they're the same thing at that point. Because the
methodology of dealing with it is very different than how you raise it. Is how do you interpret a container do you just update the container? That is a very patchy mentality of, yes, I'll bump it up every version if it has vulnerability, very Microsoft, just very fast. Or do I build it and do I own it? The problem is the mindset of organization is very different, because you had manager that came from AppSec, they want to keep their AppSec world, and manager that built OPSEC and want to build their OPSEC world, and they don't talk to each other. So we still have inside security, DevSecOps breaking apart, and that's my hot take.
Yeah, I think the extra piece is you have no one quite knows what to do with security operations stuff. As far as there are still companies that send their CSPM alerts to the SOC, even though they can't do anything with it. It's part, like, everyone's on the same like learning experience together. And that's where I actually think vendors like Phoenix and other, like, in this, who are trying to help companies deal with this remediation stuff, I think they have more insights than they probably realize, because they're actually the link between, I'm not talking in detail regularly with other companies that are FedRAMP in process and how they're handling vulnerabilities from 4 different tools, but I'm sure that's super normal for you to be doing. And so there's a lot of insight, I think, that the vendors have that they can share here too, which is why there's a different issue. I think it's so weird that security people in general have an anti-vendor vibe, when it's like, vendors are responsible for all of the innovation in the industry. They drive the research. They're the ones who can actually afford to have researchers on staff that get paid for doing research, zero-day discoveries, those types of things. Like, to me, vendors are a huge part of the ecosystem and are super valuable for that. And so that's why I don't get, the one time I had a bad sales experience and so vendors suck or something. Like, it's just weird.
Yeah, but security are bombarded, but so is everybody else in the industry. Like, I don't know why we think us security folks as the special guy, maybe because there is more of salespeople than there are CISOs, but in general, we need solution to scale, because it's cool to build product inside, but then you deal with a lot of the backlog, a lot of support. Like, building a thing is cool, maintaining it is what it makes, its execution is what it makes it really, because as soon as it falls apart, then it's unusable, then people move away from it. And I learned it the hard way by developing it internally, and then half of the team got pulled apart, and I didn't have the ability to execute.
Yep.
And then you need to make the business case. Like, you have your own internal VC that you have to raise capital from, because otherwise your tool looks like garbage and nobody want to use it. And it's double suffering, because that's not a business generating revenue. And it's really hard to maintain internal tool unless you are Netflix, Yahoo, the 1%. And even the 1%, if it's commoditized, they'll adopt it, because why spending $1 million developing it when I can buy it?
I think about one of Netflix's projects that I've used is a risk quant, which is dead at this point, but it was like their quantifiable risk model thing. And that's an example of, that's a neat experiment. And if you're Netflix, you can just let it die. But if I was part of a 3-person security compliance org, and I like built my own version of a quantifiable risk assessor, like, that thing's going to be this crazy unwieldy nightmare down the line, that if like I ever quit or whoever, it's just going to all crumble and fall apart, because it's not a scalable methodology.
And I think you mentioned something. I think where there wasn't an offering, and that's where Phoenix was born. I couldn't find something that was Phoenix, hence I created Phoenix. But in general, I think that's where a lot of companies start. I can't find a tool that satisfies my need, and maybe because my need are crazy precise or crazy different, and then you should ask yourself, why are you so different? Because you want to be different. You're the special. Is this the face or?
That's honestly, like, even FedRAMP has been, as I've talked to vendors in this space, like, FedRAMP requires government exports that like nobody has, because they're a pain to make. Like, it has to be in the right format for the government. Mm-hmm. And so that automatically disqualifies like 90+% of vendors from even being able to help. And so then I have to go down the route of like making the Python script that uses pandas and all these goofy ways to do all this stuff. So it's exactly what you're saying as far as that. I go back and forth on how opinionated these tools should be. And this is where I think Phoenix is great, in that you've really built like something that's truly open for people can get like as nerdy as they want to get with stuff. Like, it would actually work for like a FedRAMP use case. But the downside to that is that you don't have as opinionated of a we know that this container is related to this IAC or related to this code that's there. And so we're going to tie it together and give you a graph and tell you exactly where to patch it. Like those sort of, that like very opinionated framework that like demos really well. But 90% of the time when you actually deploy it in an environment, the whole thing like just crumbles under the weight of the complexity.
And the psychology as well. Because a lot of organizations, like we built this to actually influence psychology. Phoenix is a psychology tool to actually help people, help security champion, stimulate people on achieving targets. This is getting that end of, yes, I fixed this, but moving away from burn down charts. And in the journey, actually, we realized, actually, we need to link things together. So we became almost an asset inventory management with risk, with exploitability. And then we say, look, how can you achieve this faster by actually focusing on the fixes? And then, look, to solve the fixes, you need to correlate 3 or 4 different categories of asset together. So we are on that journey as well. And I think the whole industry is trying to approach this problem. CNAP is going into ASPM, ASPM is going to CNAP, and then you have CTEM, and then you have whatever. I think we're all trying to solve the same problem from different slightly angle, and you'll have, that's my hot take, you're going to have a flavor of ASPM for your problem and for your needs.
I think this was really helpful to be talking about this after I've done the thinking about CNAP, because CNAP is basically, look, we've done all these acronyms. Isn't that helpful? And you're like, I don't know, maybe. And so I think when it comes to who's going to win the market here, what are we going to see long-term with consolidation? It's all about who's going to hit the right combination of tools that actually provide like the biggest bang for your buck value of what people are looking for, the right use case. And it's really hard to know that ahead of time. And that's because I've done so much thinking about like, why is Wiz so far ahead on the CSPM space? And I thought for a long time, it was just because it's so easy to set up and the agentless angle is so strong that even though you lose things from doing that, that what you're giving up is worth the ease of implementation. But I think it's actually comes back to what you said about asset management. It's so weird to me because nobody cares about asset management tools anymore. Like nobody's looking to buy them. But the first tab on every one of these providers is assets. So Wiz is querying for assets. You guys all have assets. Like every remediation platform, like it's a tab on the platform because it's fundamental to the whole thing working. And so I think that's really at the heart of what Wiz got right. And I don't think they could have really known this fully ahead of time, is like the combination of the asset management and the vuln management with an agentless scanner was just like this combination that was super attractive early on. And I think in the ASPM space, one of these vendors is going to hit that like juicy combination that they don't even really know is really what people super want. And then that's going to be what dictates the rest of the piece.
I think that there is even another layer of the cake. I think ASPM has started with that flavor. We started with that flavor back in the days because we needed to handle all of these problems and this asset in a way and also attribute the right asset to the right team. But then there was another strong push from the US to say everybody needs to do security and software security. So patching is not good enough. Yep. Everybody needs to do software security. And all of a sudden, you need to start as a startup, a program with 15 tools, and you can't buy 15 tools because
that's why ASPM should have scanning. That's why it should be part of the definition, right?
Yes and no. I still think that if you do good one thing, you're gonna do crap. Sorry for my French. The other thing.
No, I totally agree. Yep. And I think it should. That's why I love Aikido so much. It's just from a marketing perspective. They're like, look, here's the open source stuff we're using. And the reason I love it so much is because that's what everyone else is using. Like everyone's container scanning is just Trivy. Everyone's SAST and SCA is just SemGrep. Like it's so awesome to just see them come out and say it and say, hey, but we're all in one. And it's all that's so awesome to just get all of it, know that they're going to do their own data manipulation to make it less painful to try to help, but just so that you at least know what you're getting instead of getting sold this idea that like, we've got every best in the world point solution you've ever seen because we did all this custom in-house stuff. And that's a lot harder to, in my mind, to try to sell at this point. Like I'm going to go out and buy 8 different scanners and an ASPM tool to manage and orchestrate.
It's going to hit a threshold point where it's like you're going to buy a Vanta and then you're going to go and do FedRAMP with Vanta. No, you're not going to do that. You need some specialized tool. Like,
Look,
I
we
think,
had a FedRAMP button in control. Maybe you got to go back. You got to go back and use the control product, the little 5 guy. We had those controls in there.
I don't know. I think there is a
Didn't-
threshold where you need an all-in-one scanner, and then you're gonna evolve from it, and then maybe you're gonna go back to it because then has evolved. I think the market is shrinking and expanding because there is less capital. Hence, everybody goes and say, "Look, does this do 89%?" And on that, I
Yep.
agree with you. We've added the scanner from the very beginning. We just stopped at SAST and code. We're adding it anyway because, hey, I think we reached to a point where the intelligence on agentless reached to a limit, and I think that's where
Yep.
also Wiz has reached a threshold and start adding agents.
There is a Wiz. They don't market as agentless anymore because there is an agent. The Wiz sensor exists, and I loved the fact that they did that. Showed a lot about them as a company to say our whole thing has been agentless, and we're gonna go ahead and recognize quickly that there's benefits to an agent that some people might want, and we're gonna go ahead and just support it because people need it.
But it's the evolution of it, and
Yep.
the company that can adapt and evolve are the winner.
Yeah,
Because the market is not going to dictate, I think, what's good for now, but then it's going to evolve because this market is evolving so fast. So even what the market demands, like they might want to have one in all, or they going to start spread out and say,
That's
look,
right.
all of a sudden I want runtime that is dedicated on this stuff.
You'll see me post next year about how nobody wants an 8-in-1 scanner anymore. What are you guys thinking? Obviously, I want a separate tool for all of this.
Look, I think it's expanding and shrinking, and for now, there are two different needs and two different specific things that will evolve, shrink, and change and move. But that's the beauty of security. I think security change with technology change with security. Yep. There is this double loop knotted together that is we're pushing security forward, but also we're pushing technology forward, and technology is pushing security forward. That's going to make us evolve into something beautiful. Hopefully.
Yeah, and to your point, you reminded me of something I think about a lot in terms of the meeting the market where it's at right now can often be way more important than trying to theorize about like where it's going to be next year. As far as like right now, it doesn't matter what James thinks about like 8-in-1 scanning and if I'm a net new adoption, what would I do? But right now, companies have too many scanners and they need a way to try to get all of that data in one place and actually make progress burning down the backlog. Like that is the current problem. And so having a tool that actually fixes that. I remember when I met with my first vendor in this space, who I won't say who it was, I totally blew them off as like, why would like Wiz is just going to build this, Sneak is just going to build this. Like, why would I buy a tool to manage my tools? But then that vendor was the first vendor that what the company I was working at that we went to look at as like our next vendor purchase because it was like, frick, I guess we have this problem. If we got all these tools and we need a thing right now to fix the thing. So like maybe in 10 years, Wiz gets better at their vuln management stuff, Sneak gets better, whatever. But right now, this is the problem that people have is too many scanners and a way to make the backlog go down.
I think my hot take on Wiz though is the data problem. Right now, there is the next thing that they're trying to address. That is the data and incident problem that they're trying to tackle. So I think the vuln is going to fade away because data has such a problem and is so painful to deal with that is going to overshadow anything else.
Yeah, I don't know what any one of these scanners is going to do at some point. And so I think that's what really makes it so that if I'm trying to be a successful company right now, this is a great problem space to get into because it is the problem right now. There's enough, like you could theorize like Sneak launched their ASPM, but it only supports their tool. And so is Sneak's ASPM a threat to Phoenix? Like, not really, because the whole point is you have different tools that you need to orchestrate together. And so that's what I mean by maybe at some point Sneak adds other stuff or they like become a competitor. But like right now, people have this problem and there's no guarantee that this will be the same problem that exists in a year.
And with the number one integration with the first ASPM that integrate with Sneak. I'm not going to add other stuff that is under NDA or was under NDA. But anyway, I think every scanner will need a contextualization because, as you rightfully say, nobody will look at SAST, SCA, Dust, and then go to another tool and look at cloud, and then go another tool and look at container. Maybe we inherit this problem. We need to evolve it. And as you rightfully said, we need to focus on fix. We need to focus on correlating this stuff because yes, it demo cool, but also it solves a real problem that is, if I have an alert in the cloud, I need to trace it back to the container stuff. Where do I fix it? I'm not going to fix it on the cloud. And then I don't want to spend 6 hours or an hour trying to reverse engineer. I think that's the next frontier for ASPM. And that's where we're focusing on right now, obsessing on fixes.
That's, I think, the only way to actually solve this problem, besides what Tidelift's doing with paying the maintainers, which I think is a huge piece of the problem. But for like enterprises solving their own vulns, like you have to make it so that people's first thought when they get an alert isn't, am I actually vulnerable to this? It's, oh, let me just patch this. Because when you got a Microsoft alert for a patch becoming available, you didn't go like CV by CV to figure out like, oh, are we really vulnerable to this Microsoft, whatever? Like you just patch the stupid thing that you just do. And so we have to make it easy enough for people to where their first thought isn't, oh, do I use Lodash in this weird template injection way? It's no, let's just bump the version because we know exactly how to do that.
Yeah. And I think this might rant a little bit on SBOM and reachability analysis. Like we've been obsessing about reachability analysis while most of our clients from SBOM and cross government perspective said, I want a clean SBOM, period, bump everything up. Yes, that's not, like you said, FedRAMP, that's not reachable and blah, 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 blah. It needs to be clean and serve me clean SBOM. But I think that's good because it serves the community, like it serves better the community because we are pushing really security, even if it's security and noise and everything else, we're producing secure stuff.
Yeah, the reachability stuff is on the one hand difficult to market because at the end of the day it comes down to like an extra filter, and everyone says they have it. Where like they have all these tools. Oh, thank you. Someone gave us flowers. So I have looked at like 15 different tools that all have a checkbox called reachability, and none of them mean the same thing by it. So that's one problem. And then I love talking with Armo about VEX statements, especially this was a big thing at VulnCon because I didn't know what a VEX statement was, and I was super happy not knowing what it was. But now I know what it is, and it's, oh, well, this is actually super useful for FedRAMP purposes of I have to have an explanation for everything, and a VEX statement lets me do that. Yeah, and so in my mind, there's like a divide here where you're either the kind of company getting asked for an SBOM or you're not. And if you are, then this stuff becomes all of a sudden like super important to you. And if you're not, then yeah. And if you're not ever asked for it, then it provides zero value. And that's what makes the divide so hard to me on SBOM is it's either the most important thing or it's totally meaningless.
Well, it's the market that drives the need, right? It's like the government has created first and second layer this need, and then all of a sudden you're not going to go and fix all of your software tomorrow, but then you're not going to lose the contract. Hence what you do, attestation, because either you push down the regulation, and I'm super proud of the US government for actually standing the ground on that. But now we have the problem of who's going to sign the attestation on 1 million vuln and say, I'll put my neck on the line after we had the case of Sullivan and the rest that say, look, you said it was right, it was clean, and I'm going to make you accountable for it. As well, agree or disagree on it, but as an executive, you will want to stake your neck on the line or not, but you have a chance to actually fight back. But that's where I say, yes, attestation is good, but ultimately it's so much easier to just bump everything up.
Yes.
I guess. That's
it depends. Is where it gets hard. It gets hard because this is why I love sort of there's a lot of innovation happening with Grit, Modern, Tidelift, Seal, with helping people do these major framework upgrades. Because on the one, I agree that probably 80% of the time it's pretty easy to either redeploy a container image or bump like a patch version of a software, but then that 20% of the time, it's like getting your smartest engineers like an entire quarter to do like a major framework upgrade. Yeah. And it like can kill your business basically because those are your guys doing like your cool Gen AI features that you're going to go to market and raise the next $20 million off of. And so you have to not do that. And the justification is like, oh, because she's bumping the Spring framework version. And it's okay, great. So I do think there's room for more innovation there. And I think there's room for honestly like a service-based approach as well. So like you just pay other company to come patch the thing for you.
unless they become vulnerable, unless they become the targets. And that's a little bit my take on, I don't want to put all my dependency into one company, because instead of having 40 targets, you have one target all of a sudden.
Yeah, and I go back and forth on chain guard is really interesting to me, where it's on the one hand I love it, on the other hand I would really need to do a hands-on evaluation all the way through, not just like a demo evaluation, but because images are generally bloated and you can remove a ton from them, but you've created now a new step in the supply chain that deviates you from upstream. And so you could run into like different, whoever's making whatever open source project you're stealing, like they're using the normal upstream thing, they're not using chain guard's thing. And so how do you know that it's going to work on the chain guard image as opposed to the regular upstream one? So that's where I don't, of course they're going to say, oh, we've solved it, that never happens, but I would need to actually get hands-on with it. I'm not saying they don't do it, I'm just saying I don't know if they do it or not.
But there is also a lot of vanilla stuff that works in a vanilla way, and at least you have somebody that is accountable, like chain guard, because at least you have somebody to blame. And that was my take on the whole vuln MVD versus paid MVD. At least you have somebody to blame. If you need to rely, it's the whole open source debate, and I think that we can do another entire podcast on that. But it's, if you're taking something for granted, take it as it is. Like it's a hot stone that you deploy in your production. So don't just adopt it, address it with the highest scrutiny, not with the lowest scrutiny. And right now we've been thinking somebody developed it, it must be safe. It's actually completely opposite. And that's what it blew my mind from a softer perspective. It's like, this should be the most looked after assets, because we're just taking an image from the web and putting it down to something and say, it's cool. Somebody has looked at it. And we have absolutely no lineage attribution. An attacker had figured it out, because now we have supply chain attack.
Yeah, it's only gotten scarier to me now that I actually maintain a couple of these things. Like, there are hundreds, if not like maybe 1,000 downloads of both the AI scanner open source tool and that insecure testing repo a month. And I could just straight up push any script. Like I could take over whatever infrastructure at any point in time that anyone's using with zero oversight into what I'm doing. Or an attacker could compromise me super easily. And that's the kind of, I want to balance it, because I don't think the answer is let's freak out and be super afraid of everything all the time. But it says that we should definitely, that's why I like Tidelift so much, is it's like, if you're using my stupid crap in your production, which you like definitely should not be, but if you are, you should pay me for that, not for my benefit, but so that I actually care to fix like whatever weird thing that's happened.
Well, hold on, Red Hat had it to the teeth, like had the support to the teeth. It's like, why can't we adopt across the board that mindset that open source is not free source, but is, if you want to adopt it, is available, but adopt it at your own risk, or pay somebody to maintain it.
Yes, exactly. That's why is there anyone doing it besides Tidelift? That's why I'm just shocked, is they just reached out to me randomly because their VP of product is in the same area of the country that I'm in. And so I was like, oh, okay, cool. But I had no idea they existed. And then there's I don't know anyone else that's even trying to solve it in this way.
No, I think I had high hope for Sneak was one, and then Sonatype was another one, because I was working with a lot of financial institution, but they never went down that route. They had just a proxy and that's it, but they never went down that route. And that's unfortunate, because it's a big problem, but it's a hot and sticky problem to take somebody somewhere from somewhere and say, look, I'm going to maintain it, because also I've been maintaining it for years, like as a software developer. Why should I give all my code to you to just maintain it? So you get into that weird conflict. So I don't know. It's a hard problem to solve. But as we go into the time, because otherwise we stream up on this discussion forever. What is your positive? Like, I think we've given a positive note, but what will be your conclusive thought and positive thoughts on the whole discussion?
I think what's positive is that the pain of these discussions is only because more and more people have gotten involved in security. Like people like me, who normally would be like a patch Windows every 2 weeks kind of guy, like getting into these discussions. All of these numbers are going up because more and more companies are paying attention to it, not because we're less secure. Like the numbers going up are actually a sign that we're getting more secure as we actually try to deal with things more legitimately, as that approach from like the big software providers comes down market. And so I think the positive note is just to remember that these problems existing is a good thing, both for security and for the market as a whole, as more people are getting involved and trying to deal with these problems.
Yes. So we're getting more secure and better just because we're just talking about it.
That's right.
Or because we are pushing people that should do something about it, doing something about
Yeah,
it.
just more people care. This is the kind of podcast that I would listen to now or like a couple years ago, but me like 5 years ago, like I'm working for whatever startup installing servers and stuff. Like I'm like installing antivirus or installing an EDR maybe, but there's no thought about like application security, open source projects. And like that stuff still existed, but I just didn't care about it at the time.
Yeah, but everything is becoming code. So I think university are expanding on this. The whole industry is demanding it. So I think the next generation is not going to come with all that legacy and that baggage of knowledge that is now useful, but also useless.
Oh, yeah. Look, if you need a guy to install a Windows 2008 server, I'm here for you.
Hey, I still remember how to write in COBOL and how to configure from relay. So
yeah, it's just we've all got our own little. Here's this ancient thing, my dot matrix printer that haunts my dreams still.
All right, brilliant, James. If somebody want to find more about you and what you write, where they can find you?
Latio.tech is we've got all up the top links to all of the different stuff, or just me on LinkedIn is my. If you want to follow me on Twitter, that's fine, but I haven't quite figured out how to make that work. So LinkedIn's better.
I don't think nobody has.
I guess I got to post more toxic stuff or something. I don't know.
Remember, it's now X.
That's right.
James, thank you so much for your time, and everybody else. This was a brilliant conversation, and I don't know, found your small open source project and makes the world a little bit better, one developer at a time. Buy them a coffee. That's how we make big, small changes and big impact. This is Francesco Cipollone, your host, James Berthoty, super great friends. And look, we need to do another one of this.
Sure.
Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thanks. See ya.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please leave us a review on Apple Podcast and post it on social media tagging Cybersecurity Cloud Podcast for a chance to win a $100 Amazon gift card. Discover other episodes at www.cybersecuritypodcast.com.